Hey, sixth grade. Here's a joke for you. Why did Aristotle name his dog Nature? Because he abhors a vacuum. Uh, that one might have gone over your heads, but I think it's funny. All right. Here's a simpler one. What do you call a Greek government official that dislikes his own people? A democritic. All right, that one was kind of dumb, but that's okay. Oh gosh, there are flies everywhere. If I'm going like this in the videos, it's because there's flies all over the place. I don't know why there are so many flies here. I don't have food out. I smell like a normal human being who showers every day. I do not understand why the flies are just like, but they are. Anyways, sorry, I had to vent a little bit. We are going to be watching what am I saying? We're going to be learning about chapter 14, section 2 right now, which is all about Athenian democracy. I believe in the email I sent to your parents this morning, I mistakenly said that you had to watch the Sparta video today. I actually meant the Athens video. So tomorrow you'll watch the Sparta video. Okay, so beginning of chapter 14, section 2. The section is titled Democracy in Athens, which is the beginning. This is what the title of the slides that we're going to be on are, starting with slide 8. So the development of democracy in the city-state of Athens was pretty gradual. It wasn't like one day they just suddenly decided to be democratic. Instead, as we learned in one of the previous videos, Solon, who was a member of the aristocracy, was the first one to sort of get the ball rolling towards creating democracy as the ruling force in Athens. And it wasn't exactly a smooth ride to get to democracy. Remember, after Solon, there were periods of tyranny. But eventually, there was an Athenian leader named Cleisthenes who came to power at some point after Solon. And Cleisthenes is called the father of Athenian democracy because he's the one who really took significant steps towards actually making Greece democratic. So Solon is sort of the one who lit the spark of the fuse for democracy, but Cleisthenes is the one who actually made democracy explode in Athens. All right. So Cleisthenes, his role in instituting democracy is that he instituted a lot of reforms that basically gave everyday citizens a voice in what their government was doing. So one of the things he did is he created a democratic constitution. That means he created a governing document for Athens that had a lot of democratic features in it. He also doubled the number of citizens who were able to vote. So Cleisthenes believed it was very important that all citizens of Athens can vote, not just landowners, not just wealthy people, but all citizens, regardless of if they were rich or poor, powerful or weak. He thought if you were a citizen, you should be able to vote. Now remember, citizens are not foreigners, they're not medics, and they're not women. They're men only, right? Native-born men only. So by doubling the amount of citizens who can vote, this increases the influence of the poor in their local government, and it reduces the power of the aristocracy. So Cleisthenes shifts power away from the aristocracy towards the lower classes. Cleisthenes also increases the power of the assembly. So the assembly is a group of not just aristocrats, but also poor farmers who get to meet together and debate political issues and make decisions on behalf of the city-state. So he made the assembly a lot more powerful than it was before. And so basically, after Cleisthenes reforms, Athens is now pretty much a democracy. It's not totally there yet, but it's pretty much at the point where it's a democracy now. So Athenians pretty quickly became very proud of their democracy. It made them unique and elite among all of the Greek city states. They thought that their system of government was superior to all other systems of government because it seemed to work fairly well. Um, Now, after Cleisthenes, there continued to be more democratic reforms that were instituted. So, for example, one of the things that happened after Cleisthenes died was in later generations, Athens introduced something called the jury, right? So, the jury, we know in the United States what a jury is, um, but juries were not around in the ancient world until Athens introduced them. A jury, of course, is a group of people who decide the outcome of a court case based on evidence and arguments that they hear. So, if um, if Lauren commits a crime, right, uh, and she goes to court, that court is not going to be decided by a judge. Instead, that decision, her case is not going to be decided by a judge. It's going to be decided by a jury. Right? Okay. So in Athens, the jury was made of citizens, whereas before, courts were controlled by judges. So it used to be the case that if Lauren commits a crime, she would go to court, and then Audrey would decide if she's guilty and what kind of punishment Lauren gets, because Audrey is a judge. But after a jury, Lauren goes before a court, and there's a large group of people, maybe the entire class, decides if Lauren is guilty and what sorts of punishment she should receive. So a jury is more democratic because if Audrey doesn't like Lauren, let's say Audrey and Lauren are like enemies for some reason, then Audrey would be inclined to find Lauren guilty and have her sentenced to death or something like that. Right? With a jury, you're more likely to get a fair outcome because a jury is not going to be enemies with the person who is on trial most of the time, right? Usually someone only has like one or two or three enemies. You're not going to have enemies on the entire jury. So juries were made up of dozens, sometimes hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people who would cast a vote as to whether or not you were guilty of the crime of which you were accused. Right? So it gives citizens the power to decide the outcome of court cases, which is really important. All right. Now, in the 450s, so we're about, I think, 100 years or so after Solon, maybe like, I don't know, a few generations after Cleisthenes as well. There's a guy named Pericles who institutes even more democratic reforms in Athens. So remember, democracy is arriving in stages in Athens. It's not just one big wave that hits it all at once. It's several steps that lead to what we would call democracy. So Pericles is an Athenian who he has a lot of power in the government, and he's a very important speaker. He's also a military leader, so he has a lot of influence in the Athenian government. And he is able to institute laws that pay citizens to participate on juries and also pay citizens to participate in other forms of government. Right? So this makes it possible for a poor person to be on a jury. Because if you're not paid for being on a jury, you can't afford to leave your farm for that day. You can't afford to leave your flock for that day, right? If you want to participate in government, you have the right to, but what was happening is really only the wealthy people were actually taking the time to do it because only the wealthy people could afford to take time off of their work in order to serve on a jury or vote in an assembly or something like that. So Pericles said, no, we need to pay the poor so that they can leave their jobs for that day and actually participate in government. Pericles also did something that was totally revolutionary. He recognized women as citizens. Now, The type of citizenship that women had was very limited compared to that of men. But because of Pericles, women who were born and raised in Athens now did have certain rights and responsibilities that they didn't have before. Now, they still didn't have very many legal rights. They still couldn't be in a jury. They still couldn't vote. They still couldn't ever be elected to anything. But they did have more rights than they did have before. Right? So Athenians were very proud of their democracy because they knew it was totally unique and it seemed to be working. Now, there are a few reasons that Athenians understood their democracy was special. Number one, because it made citizens equal under the law. So according to the law, it didn't really matter if you were rich or poor. Right? You were seen as an equal under the law. The law applied equally to all citizens. So if someone really wealthy commits a crime against someone who's really poor, that law is going to be applied to punish the wealthy person, even though his victim is poor. This is pretty new in the ancient world. It's unique. So the law is respected. Number two, the law also protects individual rights and liberties. So the law says you as a citizen have certain rights. The Athenian government can't just come and take your farm because they need it. Right? You have the right to own and use your property how you want it to be used. If you're accused of a crime, right, you have a right to have a jury trial. Right? You can't, if you're accused of a crime, you're not just going to be thrown in jail for no reason. You have a right to give a speech in front of a jury and defend yourself, and the jury will vote. Number three, Athenian democracy also made it possible for people to use their abilities and their hard work to improve their lives. Right? So before Athenian democracy, the class you were born into kind of dictated how your life would go. After the institution of Athenian democracy, because of protections for individual rights and liberties and the ability of citizens to participate in government, it was possible for someone who was of a lower class to improve their life, right? Maybe by participating in government, maybe by being able to use their property in a way that would allow them to earn more money. If you were an Athenian citizen, you could sort of work hard to have a happier, more fulfilling life. This was new. Okay, other things that helped democracy grow in Athens. So number one, the Athenian Navy. Now, what does this have to do with democracy? Well, the Athenian Navy started to become really important because rowers in Athenian warships were mostly members of the lower class. So just like the phalanx, if you are an important part of the military, you can use that power to kind of leverage the government to change laws or to enact policies to improve your life. Right? So rowers made warships really important in naval battles. So lower classes were seen as more valuable and more important because these lower classes are the ones who are actually rowing these warships. So rowers demanded like a greater role for the low class in Athenian government, and the Athenian government listened to what they had to say. Another reason democracy was growing in Athens is because of trade and commerce, which made Athens more wealthy than the other city-states. Athens was the richest city-state because Athens was the most open to trade and commerce. A lot of citizens could afford slaves, so this means they didn't have to spend all their time working, and they could spend more time focusing on politics. All right, they got to think about things like, what is the government doing? Are they enacting laws that are fair and that are going to help me, or are they doing things that are greedy and selfish? Right? Because more Athenians were wealthy and owned slaves, this means you didn't have to focus every day on your farm or your flock or your business.